Hello, and welcome to Scott's Odyssey. In a previous episode, we spoke about the Paoli massacre, led by British General No Flint Grey and his surprise attack against the men of Brigadier General Anthony Wayne. But we're not here to discuss a battle of the Revolution. What I want to talk about is, why was General Wayne called Mad Anthony? See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage, and if you're new to Scott's Odyssey, welcome aboard. The field of history is primarily a systemic study and the formal documentation of series or past events, usually connected with someone or something in particular. Unfortunately, this means that it's a liberal art and not a science, which in turn means it gets treated like a liberal art where people attempt to apply epistemological philosophy as if they know things that grant them the ability to extrapolate what, why, and who these people or events truly were, even though the process for history is supposed to be using the scientific method at every stage of the process. I only include this information because this video will not be able to preclude the number of idiots that will think their voice matters in the comments when they disagree with me. But alas, it will make for great counter-comment trolling that will allow me to make them infamous, just the way they wanted to be in the first place. Born in Chester County, Pennsylvania, just a mile outside of Paoli, and I don't know why historians have a problem with this, but was born on his family's 500-acre estate called Waynesboro, not to be confused with Waynesboro. Borough. You get the idea. Where the stone homestead still stands in Easttown Township. Anyway, Anthony Wayne was your typical first-generation American born to a typical colonial family that was doing well for themselves. His father, Isaac Wayne, owned and operated a tannery, and he served as a representative of the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly, meaning he was well-known, well-affiliated, and well-respected to hold such a position. To give a little more clarity on the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly, during this time, William Penn framed his own form of government for the province of Pennsylvania, which makes sense being it was his land granted by the king for the king. During this time, Penn was the governor, and there were 72 members appointed to be part of the provincial council, somewhat like state senators do today. Their job was governing the province, and Isaac Wayne was in charge of Chester County. During part of the French and Indian War from 1755 to 1758, Isaac served as a captain in the provincial forces of Pennsylvania. You see, there were not many British military here in the colonies, and well, the colonies needed to defend themselves, so they were given warrant for the colonial governors to create what were called provincial troops, which differed from provincial militia because they were full-time military while they served, similar to modern-day National Guard. To break it down, the British Army would be what was called the Army, the provincial troops would be the National Guard, and the militia were independent of the Crown, Army, and provincial troops, but were granted equal fighting capabilities consisting of every and any able man who could fight for their home and their community's well-being. The only exception being that at any time the Crown could revoke those rights from its citizenry and deploy the army, not the provincial troops, against any uprisings, or they could take away anything they had, including their food and home, for the benefit of the army. So let's just chalk off the list all that modern garbage people say regarding what was meant when we amended the Constitution and laid claim that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, which of course is what already existed, with the exception that the government cannot take away the armaments the citizens use to protect their liberties in order to maintain a free state. So yeah, Isaac saw some bad stuff happen and probably read a ton of missives regarding the outcome of Indian raids on homesteads and plantations. Not to mention that Isaac's father, Anthony's grandfather, was Captain Anthony Wayne, a famous veteran who commanded a company of dragoons against the deposed King James III in the Battle of Drogheda in Ireland, more commonly known as the Cath na Bone, or as non-Gaelic speaking people would say, the Battle of the Boyne. Anthony's mother, Elizabeth, was a homemaker and an educator of Anthony and his brother William, as well as his three sisters, Hannah, Anne, and Margaret. I give you this background to help you understand something about young Anthony. As Anthony came of age, his father wanted him to become a farmer. And well, as history tells us through his future actions, Anthony did not want to be a farmer. This did not sit well with Isaac, so he shipped his son off to his brother's private academy in Philadelphia. While at this College of Philadelphia, Anthony was educated in surveying for 2 years because, well, he was darn good at numbers and math. Then in 1765, Anthony was sent by Benjamin Franklin to work for a year in Nova Scotia surveying 100,000 acres. The following year, he assisted in the settlement of Moncton and helped them with preparing their infrastructure to last through upcoming winters. In 1766, he married, had 2 children, and allegedly had a handful of concubinage throughout his life, which ultimately led to his, well, to use the parlance of the times, estrangement from his good wife. Yes, the word is concubinage, meaning a married man having an extramarital affair on his wife, as opposed to if a married wife was having the extramarital affair, it's called adultery. He went back to work in the family tannery in 1767 and continued working there until his parents handed him the reins and became his job to take over the family farm. Don't you just love when dads bear down on you long enough that inevitably it settles in and you have to walk in their decided shoes? But this forced manifest destiny would not last very long, and Anthony would have a chance to break free from the chains of dear old dad's wishes and live out his dream. The colonies were getting very upset with the crown interfering with their livelihoods and imposing more strict taxes. And well, you know the story of what kicked off the revolution, and we're here to talk about good old Tony Wayne. At this time, Anthony had risen up through the political ranks in Chester County from being on the Committee of Safety to being elected into the Pennsylvania Provincial Assembly, if you can call being the son and grandson of great war heroes and former provincial assemblymen elected. Flash forward to 1775. Anthony was now nominated to the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety. Unlike the Chester County Committee of Safety, which watch over the welfare of its people by doing what the Crown told them to do, the Pennsylvania Committee of Safety was, well, a shadow government. Yeah, a real-life shadow government, staffed by patriots from all around the colonies who implemented tactics that legally and without a second glance from the Crown took away all royal officials stationed in the actual colonies. See, that's the stuff that makes the Revolution a spectacular story. What the smart men looking out for the well-being of their homes actually did, without ever needing to pick up a weapon on the onset. On this committee of safety were also John Dickinson, the lawyer and masterful linguist who worded publications and letters to the king, as well as the final draft of the Declaration of the Causes and Necessity of Taking Up Arms. Then there was Robert Morris, who was essentially the financier of the Revolution. When it came to money and where to acquire assets, he was face from the A-team. Lastly, and by no means less importantly, was the final member of the committee, Benjamin Franklin, the GOAT himself. If you don't know what GOAT means, it's an acronym for greatest of all time. And yes, Ben was a GOAT, not only with creating a nation and framing a government, but in being a warlord criminal, a terrorist extraordinaire, a mad scientist inventor, and the Mac Daddy with the ladies in Gay Paris. But we'll talk about his exploits into madness in a different video. When Britain kicked out the Intolerable Acts in October of 1774, which was 4 punitive laws that Parliament placed on all colonists, but specifically to punish Massachusetts for the little Tea Party protest the year before. It is said that Anthony kind of got a little crazy, so publicly radical that his position on the Chester County Committee of Safety was revoked and granted to a much more quiet and relaxed Quaker. And trust me, as a former mayor of a borough that is trying to pass bogus Karen laws and turn our little city into an HOA, I totally get what type of anger Anthony was having to deal with. On January 3rd of 1776, Anthony was nominated to be the colonel of the 4th Pennsylvania Regiment by the Second Continental Congress. Just as a side note, the 4th Pennsylvania Regiment was known just a week prior as the 3rd Pennsylvania Battalion. You see, a battalion such as the 3rd Pennsylvania Battalion consisted of anywhere from 300 up to about 1,000 volunteer soldiers. That is what started on December 9th of 1775. By January 1st, and with Wayne's recruitment, there were so many volunteers that this original battalion actually had to delve out rank to other people, break the current battalion, and turn it into a regiment, where a regiment consists of 3,000 to 5,000 soldiers. And instead of it being the 3rd Pennsylvania Regiment, it actually became the 4th Pennsylvania Regiment. So the number of volunteer soldiers in Pennsylvania started with about 1,000 in late November of 1775 and was at over 20,000 by January 3rd of 1776. This is still a few weeks before Thomas Paine even released the pamphlet Common Sense, and it all stemmed from the shot heard round the world back in April 19th, 1775. So let's just explain the reasoning behind how the shot heard round the world caused so many people to show up for soldier duty in Pennsylvania. Remember when I said a militia is a citizen-built group of soldiers that are not part of the troops and not part of the army under the crown, but the locals taking care of their own, and it was totally legal and expected by the crown that people would take care of their own from invaders such as Indians and, as we learned in a previous episode, pirates. Well, the shot heard round the world from the viewpoint of the colonist went down like this. The crown imposed the Intolerable Acts upon the colonist. This pissed everybody off. British troops were given permission to quarter in areas of colonies that were deemed a little bit rambunctious in order to put the fear of the king back into them. Word got out that British General Thomas Gage made the decision to take their weapons and gunpowder to prevent any potential rebellion. And, well, they needed that to protect themselves. So 70 militiamen were present and protecting the gun stores of the colonists. Because of the Intolerable Acts, none of them said anything about taking away the rights of the individual to protect themselves from foreign invaders or warring countries like Indians, pirates, the Spanish, or even the French, all of whom had mega beef with all British people and colonies at this time. So the colonial militiamen were 100% in their right to protect the magazine holding the weapons. The British forces decided to take the weapons away by force, and in the scuffle, someone shot first. This led to the complete and utter decimation of many lives, as the British Army killed many of its own citizens in a swath from Concord to Lexington. Progressive historians call them the battles of Concord and Lexington. But let's get something straight here. There were no battles. They were people who hated the colonists and were loyal to their king, who decided to go after unarmed citizens, take what guns they had stockpiled, and put them down like the scum he felt they were. But this would bite Britain in the ass. Oh, and there's a hidden warning to be heeded by our current US government about their current actions and all those people pushing non-reactive and more conservative people with their belief that their feelings and their ways must be accepted by everyone. As history shows us repeatedly, one should not wake a sleeping giant filled with terrible resolve. Back to Colonel Anthony Wayne. His first real duty over the regiment was to reinforce what was left of Benedict Arnold's Canadian expedition, which, according to a messenger, was currently retreating south after a campaign to take out the British stronghold in Quebec went disastrously wrong. Yeah, we were secretly already attacking the British with our smaller militia as soon as we had our first regiment filled back in the earlier part of December 1775. So you might call that the first official battle of the Revolution, except it was not here in the colonies. So Colonel Wayne got up there, bailed out Benedict Arnold, and they retreated safely south in May of 1776. On his way back, he was ordered to stop in Ticonderoga, New York, and fortify Fort Ticonderoga to protect from and stop any retaliation coming down from Canada by land or by the Hudson River, which probably made Benedict Arnold happy because he and Ethan Allen, with the Green Mountain Boys, on their way to try and kick ass in Quebec, had just kicked the British out of this fort in the previous May of 1775. And they sent Henry Knox with all the artillery down to Boston to use it against the British. And as a side note, yes, we ended up losing this fort back to the British in 1777, but not because of a lack of leadership put forth by now Brigadier General Anthony Wayne, because by that time his regiment was doing so well, they were moved back to Pennsylvania and busy in Brandywine, Paoli, and Germantown, where the action was really hot. Needless to say, based on the way he was raised, the liberties he experienced in his youth, and his intelligence, Anthony had quite a bit of what we would now call red, white, and blue blood running through his veins. As a matter of fact, he hated incompetence and anyone who would seek a diplomatic resolution to others infringing on his or others' liberty. This was fully exposed when he was told to form a military line against the British, and stated, "The only good lines are those nature made," and creating a situation where, as far as what was considered proper military warfare maneuvers, would have his men line the woods and hide behind trees, performing guerrilla tactics against the approaching British military line of men so often depicted in Revolutionary battles. I saw that a lot of historians like to call Anthony a wonderful tactician, man of great character, and someone who could get the job done. But I think there may have been a lot more going on than meets the eyes. You remember that part about the sneaky stuff the smart people were doing? Well, Anthony was not given any great battles to go into. Nope, he was given the job of taking men into complete messes. And from a tactician standpoint, they were battles that were pretty much all lost before they even started. But most of them actually ended up being stalemates, like the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey, or complete tactical surprises like his conquest raid on the British fort in Stony Point of New York, where he actually used spies, confidential informers, and turncoats, along with an elite group of troops to defeat British troops in a quick and very daring assault on their post. Now, because of his loyalty to the movement and George Washington, Anthony was extremely strict when it came to discipline. There was this one fellow named Jemmy under Anthony's command who was commonly referred to as Jemmy the Rover or the Commodore, who was considered a bit pompous and extremely eccentric. But he was a useful talker who was often used as a spy by Anthony. Now, unfortunately, he had a tendency to be a deserter, which earned him some time in the blockhouse. On one occasion, he got locked up for disorderly conduct and then had the audacity to write a letter requesting General Anthony Wayne have him released. Anthony responded by leaving him in jail and stated, "If it happens again, have him receive 29 lashes well laid on for his action." In which Jemmy exclaimed, "Anthony is mad. He must be mad or he would help me. Mad Anthony. That's what he is. Mad Anthony Wayne." like a wildfire, this story was told around campfires in the Continental Army, and is where Anthony picked up his battle nickname of Mad Anthony. Not because of what all these current historians say about him being called Mad Anthony because of his tactics or military ardor or aggressive leadership in combat. But you see, Jemmy wasn't the only eccentric. Anthony, as we already know, was extremely smart and, well, oddly loyal. I mean oddly loyal only because he had his daddy issues and didn't want the tannery farm, but only to become a warrior like his father and grandfather, which history tells us he actually got. But then there was the other issues with Anthony. Yeah, like telling Washington that on his order he would lay siege to hell, or always quoting Caesar in response to his actions or thought processes. And after the garbage that went down with No Flint Gray and Paoli, and after he tried to implicate himself as incompetent and demanded to be fully court-martialed, which led only to him being hailed for his honesty and being such an honorable man, took to the action of actually leading multiple bayonet-only charges against British soldiers. Yeah, odd. And with his known temper and extremely rash actions, both when not in combat, but even more so when he was actually involved directly in the field of battle, earned him the respect of not having a nickname. Not to mention that he had quite the colorful tongue when speaking to other people and letting them know what he thought with all the required alliterative expletives of a Philadelphian. When he learned about Benedict Arnold planning on turning over West Point to the British in an act of betrayal, he immediately and without order took his men to West Point to secure it. It is said that General Benedict Arnold, when he found out that he himself was found out, he fled to the enemy, and this is why Anthony moved into the fort to secure it. But it would be my guess, and yes, this is only speculation, that after saving Benedict Arnold's ass from being in a sling multiple times before, and then garnering a real name of someone who you just don't mess with in war, and then add that to him being a rather, let's say, harsh disciplinarian, I believe Benedict Arnold ran so as not to meet the full wrath of an extremely angry and mean red-blooded American coming to put a smackdown on his ass for messing up. After the West Point incident, Anthony went south and joined up with Marie, Joseph, Paul, Ives, Roch, Gelbet, Dumotet, Marquis de Lafayette, or as you're taught in school, just Marquis de Lafayette. And this was probably because that man's ego and more than apparent quest for death and honor was only matched by Anthony himself. He went on to fight Lord Cornwallis in Green Spring against all odds. I mean, he had only 800 men and went up against 5,000 British soldiers. Did he win? No. Did he lose? Well, he did not gain Green Spring nor kill Cornwallis, but he only lost 28 soldiers and really pissed off good old Lord Cornwallis. When he got his men back up to 1,000, he went all in on the siege of Yorktown, or as I like to call it, Lord Cornwallis Part 2. And yes, Yorktown was a total win with the surrender of Cornwallis. Then Anthony moved on to Georgia, helping in the total defeat and reclamation of the colony against both the British and the Indians. Then the war was over and the United States was formed. Anthony picked up some property in Georgia, started a plantation, and got himself a slave. Yes, just one, probably as a basic servant, and there's probably more to the story, but he got himself a slave. And all the rage on the internet nowadays because the man decided that when in Rome, do as the Romans do, is now considered a bad man. While in Georgia, he was elected to the House of Representatives, and after 2 years, his seat was actually declared vacant because of alleged election fraud. It was at this point that Anthony got so mad he decided to get a little drunk, and well, as it was recorded, decided to ride his horse through the lobby of a luxury hotel while in his cups, meaning while he was drunk as a skunk. And this is where you think it would end, right? Well, no, not exactly. Even after all this, Anthony was picked up by President George Washington to become Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army. Not because there wasn't already a Commander-in-Chief, but because the current U.S. Army was getting its collective ass handed to them in battles with the Northwest Indian Confederation, where Anthony built up the army and effectively ended the Indian resistance to Manifest Destiny at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, and then ending it completely on the Maumee River near Fort Miami, and then completing a diplomatic peace treaty of Greenville. That was in August 1795. Then, in December of 1796, at age 51, Anthony Wayne died from gout while coming back from a military inspection of Detroit. His death occurred en route to Pennsylvania. His ship arrived from Detroit at Fort Presque Isle, the last stop on his military inspection rotation. He suffered a serious gout attack, which was not uncommon in older people during this time. Letters were sent to doctors in Pittsburgh and nearby forts to help Anthony. Unfortunately, the day the first doctors arrived would end up being the same day as Anthony's death. Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Army, General Mad Anthony Wayne, was laid out in a simple pine box with his initials and date of death hammered into the top with plain brass tacks, and he was placed at the foot of the blockhouse flagstaff on Garrison Hill. And this is by his deathbed wish, where he wanted to be buried when he passed from an illness. And that's the story of Mad Anthony Wayne. Well, sort of. It would appear his life continued with all this madness even after his death. 12 years post-mortem, Anthony's daughter Peggy sent Anthony's son Isaac on a mission to bring Daddy home to the Waynesboro estate and have him placed in the family plot at St. David's Church in Radnor. So the adventure began where Isaac rode to Presque Isle in a small sulky. Yes, a sulky, a two-wheeled racing carriage to carry out this mission. So we're talking about a trip from the far southeast of Pennsylvania through the only recently open and safer from Indians and still incredibly wild Pennsylvania area to Erie. When he arrived, then came his request to exhume his father, which was met by all sorts of comments and side glances. Dr. John Wallace, the Pittsburgh physician who was there at the time of Anthony's death, also arrived at the site to oversee this endeavor. When they exhumed Anthony's remains, one leg was partially decayed, presumably the one that had the gout. But even after 13 total years, the entire rest of Anthony's body was perfectly preserved. Unfortunately for Isaac, he came up in a sulky and had only prepared to have room for the bones of his father in a box. Isaac paid a lot of money for Dr. Wallace to hack his father's body into pieces and boil it in a large iron kettle to remove all of the flesh from the bones. Yeah, this really happened. The doctor cleaned the bones and placed them into Isaac's box for transportation. The doctor was so upset with this entire process that any excess flesh along with his medical instruments were tossed back into the coffin, and it was reinterred at the fort. Isaac began his 400-mile journey back to Chester County, but it wasn't a pleasant journey. Because of the rough road, there was, well, not one time, but several times, where the box fell off of the sulky and broke open, spreading Anthony's bones in every direction. It's claimed that many of his bones are spread all the way from Erie to Radnor. Isaac arrived home, and what remains of Anthony that survived the trip were interred at St. David's. There are those who believe that on Anthony's birthday, which just happens to be January 1st, New Year's Day, Anthony's ghost rises from his grave at St. David's and travels across the state looking for his missing parts. So yeah, this anti-hero of a man who helped in making the United States is buried in 2 physical locations in the state, as well as possibly being scattered a bit here and there in between. And if you think he was not considered too important in his role, realize there are numerous towns and locations throughout the entire state that carry his name. Mad Anthony Wayne, the epitome of what it means to be a Pennonite and the ultimate patriot of the United States of America. Rest in peace, Anthony. Rest in peace. I hope you enjoyed this story about Pennsylvania's very own Mad Anthony Wayne. If you wouldn't mind, sacrifice a like to the AI algorithm below and hit that subscribe button to see more content from this channel. If you wouldn't mind going out and picking up some merch or making a donation on PayPal or to the Patreon and help support a creator. As always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thank you.